My name is Evelyn Mercer, and I am 65 years old. I spent most of my life surrounded by books, first as a librarian, then as a teacher in a small elementary school in Charleston, South Carolina. After 40 years of marriage to my husband, Dr. Thomas Mercer, a dentist with a perfect smile and a talent for keeping secrets, I thought I understood what loyalty meant, but I was wrong. It began one quiet Tuesday morning. Thomas had dropped his phone the night before during dinner, cracking the screen. He cursed softly and handed it to me. "Can you take it to Greg's tech fix tomorrow? You know how to handle that stuff better than I do." He said it with that same dismissive tone he often used, the one that made me feel like a secretary rather than a wife. The next morning, I drove across town to Greg's little repair shop near the old library where I used to work. Greg was a longtime family friend, someone who'd fixed Thomas's office computers for years. When I handed him the phone, he nodded, opened the back cover, and frowned. "Give me 10 minutes, Evelyn," he said, his voice lower than usual. I sat down, flipping through a magazine, unaware that those 10 minutes would change the rest of my life. When Greg returned, he looked pale. He wiped his hands on a rag and gestured toward the small storage room behind the counter. "Can we talk privately?" Something in his voice made my stomach tighten. Inside the little room, surrounded by boxes of chargers and cables, he whispered, "Evelyn, I need you to listen carefully. Cancel your credit cards tonight, change the locks, and whatever you do, don't eat or drink anything Thomas gives you." For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. "Greg, what are you talking about?" He pulled out the cracked phone and showed me the screen. There, under scheduled messages, were 7 text drafts, all timed for the following week. Each was addressed to a woman named Elle. The messages mentioned things like the insurance paperwork is in the drawer, funeral arrangements confirmed, and after she's gone, the funds will transfer automatically. My knees felt weak. Greg's hand trembled as he scrolled. "There are also voice memos," he said. "I only listened to one. Evelyn, I'm not supposed to get involved, but this isn't just an affair. He's planning something bad." The room spun. I could barely hear my own voice. "You're saying my husband Thomas is planning to kill me?" Greg swallowed hard. "I can't say for sure, but he's talking about your life insurance, about moving money to someone named Laura." The messages sound like a countdown. I stood there, gripping the edge of the table. My heart was pounding, but my mind strangely was calm. "Greg," I said softly, "can you copy everything? The messages, the recordings, everything?" He nodded. "Already did. I'll email them to you from a secure address." When I walked out of that shop, the sky was overcast, heavy with the smell of rain. I remember looking at the reflection of my face in the car window. It didn't look like me anymore. It looked like someone older, wiser, and suddenly very, very alone. Driving home, I kept hearing Greg's words echo in my head: "Cancel your cards, change the locks." After 40 years beside the same man, I realized I had no idea who he truly was. But I knew one thing for certain: I was not going to die quietly. The drive back home was only 15 minutes, but it felt like hours. The streets of Charleston passed by in a blur, the old oak trees, the pastel houses, the church steeples that once comforted me. Everything looked the same, yet nothing felt familiar anymore. I kept my hands steady on the steering wheel, forcing myself to breathe evenly. Years of being a librarian had taught me how to stay calm during chaos, when children cried, when books went missing, when tempers flared. But this wasn't a missing book. This was my life, being rewritten without my consent. Thomas had always been charming in public. He donated to local charities, smiled for photos, and sent flowers to his staff on their birthdays. To everyone else, he was a model husband. But behind closed doors, there were small cracks, tiny remarks meant to chip away at me. "You forget things, Evelyn. You're getting confused again. Maybe you should rest more, let me handle the finances." I used to believe he was protecting me. Now I saw it for what it was: preparation. At a red light, I closed my eyes. I could almost hear him practicing his lines, rehearsing grief for an audience that didn't yet exist. "She wasn't herself lately," he'd say. "I did everything I could," and they would believe him. Everyone always believed Thomas Mercer. By the time I reached our street, my fear had turned into focus. I wasn't going to confront him, not yet. That would give him control. I needed to understand the full picture first. Greg's warning replayed in my mind: "Don't eat or drink anything he gives you." That meant Thomas was close to acting. Maybe days away, maybe hours. I parked the car 2 houses down and sat there, watching the windows. The kitchen light was on. I saw his silhouette move past the curtain, calm routine, as if nothing had changed. He was probably brewing coffee, planning his next step. I turned off the engine and whispered to myself, "You've cataloged 1,000 mysteries in books, Evelyn. You can catalog one more." I took my purse, locked the car quietly, and entered through the side door. He looked up and smiled. "You were gone a while," he said casually. "Everything okay?" I smiled back, hiding the tremor in my hands. "Just fine. Greg said it'll take a few days." He nodded, kissed my cheek, and poured me a glass of wine. "You've had a long day," he said. I lifted the glass, pretended to sip, and set it down slowly. If he was writing my death, then I would write the ending. That night, long after Thomas had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with his repaired phone and my laptop. The house was quiet except for the sound of the clock ticking on the wall. Each second felt like a warning. Greg had sent me the copied files through a private link. When I opened them, I saw the same messages again, each scheduled for different times next week. Final paperwork done. Transfer on completion. Meet at the marina. The last one chilled me. After Thursday, it's all yours. Laura. I didn't know anyone named Laura Hale. But her name appeared again and again in his contacts, in recent transactions, even on a hotel reservation in Miami. I searched her name online. The first result was a polished photo on a business website, Laura Hale, healthcare consultant specializing in practice transitions. Her smile was too confident, her posture too controlled. Something about her eyes felt wrong. A few more clicks revealed a trail of lawsuits, all sealed, all linked to the deaths of older business partners, 3 men in their 60s, all doctors, all deceased within months of signing consulting agreements with her. The pattern was clear to anyone who wanted to see it. Thomas thought he was clever. He believed she was helping him transfer ownership of his dental practice. But in truth, Laura Hale was the spider, and he was only one more fly tangled in her web. And I, his wife, was the final thread she needed to cut. My chest tightened, but the fear slowly turned into something sharper clarity. I printed out everything, the emails, the invoices, the proof of money transfers to a bank in the Cayman Islands. I placed them in a brown folder labeled Simply T. Then I took out my phone and started recording a voice note for myself. "If anything happens to me, my name is Evelyn Mercer. My husband, Dr. Thomas Mercer, and a woman named Laura Hale are responsible. I have evidence. It's all in the folder inside the library cabinet." I saved it, hid the folder behind a row of cookbooks, and whispered to the dark kitchen, "You chose the wrong librarian, Thomas." From that moment on, I wasn't the frightened wife anymore. I was the archivist of my own survival. The following afternoon, Thomas came home earlier than usual. He was wearing a light blue dress shirt and the polite smile he used whenever he needed to convince someone of something. "Evelyn," he said, setting his briefcase on the table, "Dr. Patterson is coming by later today. Just a quick home evaluation. Nothing serious, he's helping me with our insurance renewal." I looked up from my book, pretending to be unconcerned. "Home evaluation? For what?" "Oh, it's just protocol," he said lightly. "They like to check the client's mental clarity for certain policies." I nodded slowly. There it was, the setup Greg had warned me about. Thomas was trying to build a record of my supposed confusion, to establish a trail that would make it look like I was declining. Then, when I was gone, everything would seem natural. At 4:00 sharp, Dr. Patterson arrived. He was polite but nervous, holding a clipboard with pre-filled pages. "Mrs. Mercer, I just need to ask you a few questions," he began. "Do you remember today's date?" I smiled. "Of course. It's Wednesday, April 17th, and you were here last March for my annual dental clearance." He blinked. "That's right," he said slowly, flipping a page. "And can you tell me where you are right now?" "In my own kitchen, doctor," I said pleasantly. "But your form says we're in your clinic on Broad Street. That's odd, isn't it?" He looked down at his papers. The address was indeed printed as his office location, not my home. His hand froze on the clipboard. I leaned forward, still smiling. "I like details, doctor. I used to catalog thousands of books a year. Numbers, names, addresses, they stick with me. I suppose that's what happens when you read too much." Behind him, Thomas shifted uncomfortably, trying to maintain his calm. Dr. Patterson cleared his throat, mumbled something about clerical errors, and packed his bag. He left 10 minutes later, clearly uneasy. When the door closed, Thomas turned to me, his voice tense. "You didn't have to embarrass him. I met his eyes. Oh, I didn't, but I did have to protect myself. He stared at me for a moment, as if trying to decide how much I knew. I just smiled again and returned to my book. For the first time in years, the silence between us wasn't heavy, it was dangerous. And I wanted him to feel every second of it. 2 days later, I found the missing piece of the puzzle. Thomas left his laptop open in the office, a glass of whiskey beside it, and the faint hum of his printer still running. I moved quietly to the doorway and glanced at the screen. An email thread with the subject line "Final Transition" was open. The sender, Laura Hale. Her words were cold and efficient. After Thursday, dispose of all remaining assets. We meet at the dock behind the marina at 8 p.m. You'll have the transfer documents and I'll handle the rest. That phrase, "handle the rest," stuck with me. It wasn't business language. It was a threat wrapped in corporate phrasing. I printed everything and forwarded copies to my email under a random subject line, "recipes." Then I deleted the history and stepped back into the hallway just as Thomas entered. He looked at me, smiling faintly. "Up late, sweetheart?" "Just couldn't sleep," I said. "I was reading." He nodded. "You always did love stories." His tone carried a weight that made my skin crawl. That night, I called my closest friend, Margaret Ellis, a fellow librarian who had retired 2 years before me. Margaret was practical, calm, and fiercely loyal. When I told her what was happening, she didn't gasp or argue. She simply said, "Come over tomorrow, we'll back up everything." By morning, she had a plan. We stored copies of every file on a flash drive hidden in an old cookbook at the library's archive section. We also printed out a single sheet summarizing the evidence names, dates, bank transfers, and sealed it in an envelope addressed to the Charleston Police Department. It would be mailed automatically if I didn't check in within 72 hours. "Evelyn," Margaret said quietly, "you're playing a dangerous game." "I know," I replied, "but he started it." For the next few days, I watched Thomas and Laura through a new lens. They weren't lovers. They were predators circling each other, each believing they held the upper hand. He thought she was helping him kill his wife. She thought she'd soon inherit his fortune. 2 monsters, 1 plan. All I had to do was let them destroy each other, as long as I survived the explosion. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and whispered to the humid Charleston air, "If you're going to hunt me, Thomas, you better be ready for the librarian who learned how to track wolves." Thursday arrived like any other day, sunlight spilling through the lace curtains, birds chirping on the fence. But the air in our house felt different. Thicker. Still, I woke before dawn and watched Thomas as he packed his briefcase. He moved with mechanical calm, like a man rehearsing the final act of a performance. "Dinner tonight?" he asked casually. "Let's have something special. I'll pick up wine." I smiled faintly. "That sounds lovely." He kissed my cheek, the gesture so practiced it made my skin crawl. When the door closed behind him, I exhaled and reached for the tiny recording device hidden in the kitchen cabinet. Margaret had given it to me, a small square recorder disguised as a recipe timer. By evening, I'd prepared a simple meal: roast chicken, salad, and a bottle of Pinot Noir. I poured the wine carefully, watching as he filled both glasses, his hand steady. For a second, I saw a tiny shimmer on the surface of mine, something faintly cloudy, dissolving fast. He smiled, his voice smooth, "To 40 years together." I raised my glass but didn't drink. "To truth," I said softly. At that moment, I heard the faintest sound from outside, a soft crunch of gravel. My heart raced. I turned slightly toward the window and saw a shadow move along the porch. Laura Hale had arrived. The back door creaked open, just as Thomas stood. "I'll check the roast," he said, walking toward the kitchen. I stepped back, clutching the recorder in my palm. Then she appeared, Laura, in black gloves, her hair tied back, her expression unreadable. She looked at me, surprised but composed. "You're still awake," she said coolly. "Yes," I replied, voice calm. "I prefer to see my guests before they kill me." Thomas froze mid-step. "Evelyn, what are you talking about?" I placed the recorder on the table. "Everything," I said. "Your messages, the transfers, the plan for the marina. You rehearsed this, didn't you?" Laura's face shifted, realization dawning. "You told her," she hissed at him. He stammered. "No, I didn't. Upsy must have." "Enough," I cut in. "You wanted me gone. You thought I wouldn't notice. But you forgot. Thomas, I spent 40 years filing evidence for a living." Before either could move, I spoke louder. "Margaret, are you still there?" A voice came from the speaker, steady, clear. "Yes, Evelyn, and the police are 5 minutes away." Laura lunged toward me. I threw my cup of hot coffee straight into her face. She screamed, stumbled back, knocking over the table. Thomas tried to grab my arm, but I pushed past him and ran toward the hallway. Flashing lights appeared through the window. Sirens wailed down the street. Thomas's voice cracked. "Evelyn, please let me explain." I turned back once, breath shaking. "No need, you already wrote the ending." When the police burst through the door, I didn't flinch. I just pointed to the recorder still blinking red on the floor. The courtroom was bright and cold, every sound echoing off the marble walls. Reporters whispered in the back rows, cameras clicked softly, and I sat in the front seat, hands folded on my lap. I wasn't angry anymore, just tired but alive. Laura Hale looked smaller than I remembered. Her expensive suit couldn't hide the bruises on her pride. Thomas sat 2 seats away, thinner now, his once steady hands trembling. They avoided each other's eyes, united only by their downfall. The prosecution played the recordings, Thomas discussing insurance, Laura planning logistics, both unaware that their own words would become the nails in their coffins. The jury listened in silence, expressions hardening with each passing minute. When my voice came through the speaker, calm and steady, "You forgot, Thomas, I file everything." Some of them smiled faintly. They understood. Laura was sentenced first, 25 years for conspiracy, attempted murder, and fraud. She didn't flinch when the judge spoke. Thomas's verdict followed soon after, 12 years in state prison, reduced for cooperation. When his lawyer asked if he had anything to say, Thomas turned to me, eyes full of the same arrogance he once used to charm me. "I never meant for it to go this far," he said. "You made me desperate." I met his gaze without blinking. "You made yourself disposable." He looked down. The gavel struck once, sharp as thunder. And just like that, 40 years of my life ended with one sound: final, clean, irreversible. Afterward, the detective who had handled the case, Melissa Morgan, walked me outside. "You know," she said, "most people in your position wouldn't have survived this." I smiled faintly. Most people don't spend their lives reading mysteries. As we reached the steps, I looked back at the courthouse. Justice didn't feel like victory, it felt like closure. There were no cheers, no grand speeches, just the quiet relief of breathing freely for the first time in years. Before I left, I whispered to the wind, "You wrote your ending, Thomas. I just edited it." Then I walked away, not as someone's wife or victim, but as the author of my own story. 3 months later, I sold the house. I didn't take much with me, just a few boxes of books, some photos, and my mother's old teapot. The rest went to charity. I told the realtor to price it low and move it fast. I didn't want to walk those hallways again, where every echo carried a lie. I moved to Savannah, Georgia, to a small cottage near the water. The mornings smelled of salt and magnolia blossoms. The first few weeks felt strange, too quiet, too peaceful, but then I realized that peace isn't silence. It's safety. Sometimes, when I sit on the porch watching the tide roll in, I think about who I used to be. The careful wife who believed every gentle word. The woman who mistook control for care. I want to tell her that love without respect is just decoration, that no amount of "I'm sorry" can rebuild what betrayal destroys. Margaret still calls every Sunday. We talk about books, about how the library changed, about how life goes on. She says people have started calling me the librarian who solved her own case. I laugh at that, but in truth I didn't solve anything. I just refused to stay quiet. One afternoon, Detective Morgan visited me. She brought the case file, neatly bound, and set it on my coffee table. "You can have this now," she said. "It's officially closed." I ran my fingers over the folder and smiled. "Not bad for a retired librarian," I said. Before she left, she asked, "Do you regret any of it?" I looked out at the horizon where the sea met the sky. "No," I answered softly. "You can't regret saving your own life." Now my days are simple. I volunteer at the local library twice a week. I read stories to children who still believe in heroes. Sometimes, when I close a book, I remind them that the best stories are not the ones where the hero never falls, but the ones where she gets back up. At night, when the sun sinks into the ocean, I whisper a small prayer of gratitude, not for what I lost, but for what I found: my courage, my peace, my freedom. Because in the end, I wasn't the story he wrote. I became the story he could never finish. It has been almost a year since the trial ended. The papers called it the dentist's deception. But I never read the articles. I didn't need to. The truth was already printed in my memory, line by line. Some mornings when I walk along the pier with a cup of coffee, people stop me. They recognize my name from the news, but they don't see the woman who once trembled in her own kitchen. They see someone who survived. They ask how I did it, how I found the strength to face two people who wanted me gone. I tell them the truth. Strength isn't loud. It's the quiet decision to keep going when fear tells you not to. The sea has become my companion. It moves like time, endless, unpredictable, cleansing. I've learned to let it carry away the pieces of my old life that no longer belong to me. The guilt, the doubt, even the love that once felt sacred. Sometimes I still dream of Thomas, not the man who plotted my death, but the man he was decades ago, holding my hand at our wedding, laughing at the future we thought we would share. It's strange how betrayal and memory can live side by side, but I've made peace with that. You can mourn the person they were, even while condemning what they became. Laura Hale is serving her time. I've heard she spends her days in the prison library. A part of me almost smiles at that poetic justice in its simplest form. Thomas writes occasionally from his cell. I never open his letters. I burn them one by one, watching the paper curl and fade until only ash remains. The story people remember is about revenge. But to me, it was never revenge, it was reclamation. Taking back the life, the truth, and the voice I nearly lost. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: you don't have to be young to start over. You don't have to be fearless to fight back. You just have to decide that your story isn't over yet. So to anyone listening, if you've ever been silenced, underestimated, or dismissed, remember Evelyn Mercer from Charleston. And remember that even in your quietest moment, you still hold the pen,